In the annals of Roman imperial history, few stories stand out as deeply disturbing and profoundly tragic as that of Sporus, a beautiful young boy whose fate became inexorably linked with one of history's most infamous emperors. This is not just a tale of political power or military conquest, but a chilling exploration of how the pursuit of absolute control can strip away humanity itself, leaving only the grotesque spectacle of imperial cruelty. Sporus' story unfolds within the cold marble walls of ancient Rome, a city where the line between love and possession, honor and degradation blurred completely under the relentless gaze of Emperor Nero. The year was 65 AD, and the Roman Empire stretched its vast power from the misty Isles of Britain all the way to the Euphrates River. Nero, Claudius, Caesar, Augustus, Germanicus, the Emperor of Rome, ruled with seemingly boundless authority. Yet behind the lavish splendor of his golden palace, the Domus Aurea, a terrible darkness was festering, one that would soon claim the life of an innocent young man. Nero, in his late 20s, had already shocked the Roman world with his dramatic performances, extravagant architectural projects, and chaotic relationships with those closest to him. The echoes of the catastrophic fire of 64 AD still reverberated through the streets of Rome, and whispers of the emperor's madness swept through the city as pervasive as the smoke rising from the ruins. In this world of indulgence, excess, and rampant cruelty, Sporus lived as a freedman within the imperial household, a position that, while technically granting him freedom, offered no protection against the caprices of an emperor's whim. Historical accounts describe Sporus as possessing an almost ethereal beauty, with delicate features and a graceful posture, qualities that both made him stand out and ultimately sealed his tragic fate. He caught the eye of the imperial court, not due to any ambition of his own, but simply because in a world where beauty could be a weapon, his attractiveness made him a target for exploitation. The chain of events that would lead to Sporus' horrific fate began with the death of Pompa Sabina, Nero's second wife, and the great love of his tumultuous life. She died under mysterious circumstances in 65 AD. Some sources suggest that Nero himself killed her in a fit of rage, while others point to complications during childbirth. Regardless of the truth, Pompa's death left Nero devastated, consumed by grief that soon twisted into something darker. His mourning became obsessive, and the emperor, desperately trying to reclaim what death had stolen from him, set his sights on Sporus. In the young freedman's features, he saw an uncanny resemblance to his late wife, a resemblance that would become the catalyst for the boy's tragic transformation. Ancient historians such as Cassius Dio and Suetonius wrote that Nero became fixated on this resemblance, believing that in Sporus he could somehow resurrect the woman he claimed to love above all others. His grief-stricken mind conceived a twisted plan, one that was both audacious and grotesque. Nero ordered that Sporus be castrated, permanently altering the boy's body to fulfill the emperor's warped vision. This wasn't just physical mutilation, it was the complete erasure of Sporus' identity as a man, transforming him into a thing of Nero's delusional desires, existing solely to soothe the emperor's broken psyche. The castration was carried out by imperial physicians in the sterile luxury of the palace's medical quarters, where the screams of the boy could be muffled by marble walls, and his protests brushed aside as the meaningless cries of property. Once the mutilation was complete, Nero's plan was revealed in all its horrifying absurdity. The emperor, now convinced that he had created a living tribute to his lost wife, publicly announced his intention to marry Sporus. The young man, now stripped of his identity, was given the name Sabina, after Pompeia, and was adorned in the finest clothing, including jewelry that had once belonged to the dead empress. Nero's household was instructed to treat Sporus as an empress, to address him with feminine titles, and to observe all the protocols due to an imperial wife. The wedding ceremony itself was a macabre spectacle, a grotesque parody of Roman marriage. Sporus, hardly recognizable in his elaborate feminine attire, was led through the rituals of Roman marriage, while Nero played the role of a devoted bridegroom. The ceremony was described as magnificent yet deeply disturbing, a public display of Nero's imperial madness. Guests were forced to offer congratulations and gifts, though they must have recoiled in private horror, knowing the truth behind the emperor's disturbing charade. Following the ceremony, Sporus was paraded through the streets of Rome, forced to appear at public events and ceremonies as Nero's new empress. The young man was no longer just a freedman. He was now a living symbol of the emperor's twisted emotional attachment, constantly dependent on Nero's favor and protection. He accompanied the emperor to the theater, official functions, and private dinners, where he was displayed as if he were a prized object, a living memorial to a woman who had died violently, possibly at the hands of the very man now forcing him to live in her place. The psychological toll of this existence must have been unimaginable. To be forced to live as someone else, to embody the memory of a woman whose death may have been caused by the man who now claimed to love her memory. It was a psychological prison from which Sporus could never escape. Ancient historians note that, in public appearances, Romans would see Sporus dressed as a woman, behaving as a woman, but would know the horrifying truth. Some historians suggest that, while the Roman populace was accustomed to Nero's eccentricities, they were deeply disturbed by this particular display. Sporus, in his feminine attire, was a living symbol of the emperor's moral and psychological decay. The relationship between Nero and Sporus, if it can be called a relationship, was defined by the emperor's possessive obsession and the young man's total powerlessness. Nero treated Sporus both as a beloved wife and as a cherished possession, showering him with gifts and attention while stripping away every shred of his personal identity. The emperor addressed Sporus by the name of his dead wife, spoke to him as though he were actually the woman he had lost, and demanded that Sporus embody the memory of Pompeia in every way. This cruel psychological manipulation was far worse than the physical mutilation. It was the slow and systematic erasure of Sporus's own identity. The relationship between Nero and Sporus, however disturbing, continued in its strange and twisted form for several months. Nero's attachment to Sporus seemed to grow with each passing day, marked by a volatile cycle of emotional extremes. At times, Nero would show tenderness, lavishing Sporus with expensive gifts and expressing affection. But this would often be followed by outbursts of violent rage when the young man failed to meet the emperor's impossible expectations. Sporus was required to embody the memory of a woman who had died, someone who had once been the object of Nero's love, a woman whose death had become the focal point of the emperor's obsessive grief. The mental and emotional strain this placed on Sporus was overwhelming. To embody a role that was not his own, to play the part of someone he could never be, was a form of psychological torture that must have felt like an endless nightmare. Nero's affection for Sporus was complicated by his own profound instability. The emperor's love for Pompeia had been possessive and violent in life, and his fixation on Sporus continued that pattern, though now distorted into an even more disturbing form. Nero would lash out in fury if Sporus failed to behave as Pompeia had, punishing him for imagined transgressions, even though these expectations existed solely in Nero's mind. But at other times, Nero's affection would shine through, and he would shower Sporus with lavish gifts, lavishing him with attention as if he were the woman he had lost. This cruel cycle of abuse and reward, a never-ending emotional tug-of-war, left Sporus with no clear sense of self, no respite from the roles he was forced to play. The public nature of their marriage only deepened the humiliation Sporus endured. Nero took Sporus on tours through Greece, where he displayed him as if he were his real wife, parading him before foreign dignitaries and the Greek aristocracy. These public appearances must have been particularly difficult for Sporus. Forced to maintain his feminine persona in front of strangers, he could never drop the mask or reveal his true feelings. It was a constant performance, a never-ending charade in which his own identity had no place. The young man was caught in a prison of expectations, unable to express his true thoughts or desires, all while his body and mind were slowly being destroyed by the weight of his assigned role. The psychological strain of this performance began to take its toll on Sporus's psyche. Though some may have felt pity for the young man, others were repulsed by his plight. The courtiers and servants who witnessed his daily humiliations were forced to play along with the farce, treating him as the emperor's empress, while knowing full well that he was not a woman at all, but a mutilated man. They were complicit in the lie that had been spun around Sporus, maintaining the illusion of his identity while watching him suffer. Every day, Sporus had to wear the clothing of a woman, speak in a manner deemed appropriate for an empress, and act according to the expectations of the emperor. His mutilated body, his castration, was a constant reminder of what had been taken from him, both physically and emotionally. Every gesture, every movement, every word had to be calculated to maintain the illusion that he was the woman Nero wanted him to be. The sense of alienation must have been profound. Sporus was trapped in a role that he did not choose, living a life that was not his own, without the possibility of escape. Nero's reign was increasingly marked by instability. The emperor's obsession with theatrical performances, his neglect of imperial duties, and his erratic behavior alienated many of his once loyal supporters. As his reign continued to spiral out of control, tensions began to rise within the empire. Military commanders began to question their loyalty to an emperor who seemed more interested in parading a castrated boy as his empress than in governing the vast empire under his control. For many, Sporus became a symbol of Nero's madness, the embodiment of an emperor's cruelty and disregard for tradition. By 68 AD, the political situation in Rome had become untenable. The Praetorian Guard, the Senate, and several provincial governors declared their opposition to Nero's rule. The emperor, faced with universal rejection, fled Rome with a small group of loyal supporters, including Sporus. Nero's empire was crumbling, and the young man who had once been a free citizen now found himself bound to a man whose power was rapidly disintegrating. His survival depended entirely on Nero's whims, and it was unclear whether he would live or die as the emperor's regime collapsed around him. The final days of Nero's reign were marked by chaos and uncertainty. The emperor's behavior became even more erratic as the walls closed in on him. Sporus, still dressed as Nero's empress, remained at his side, maintaining the illusion that he was the object of the emperor's obsession. As the emperor's downfall became inevitable, Sporus was trapped in an even more hopeless situation. He was tied to a man who had already destroyed his life, and Nero's fall from power would surely mean Sporus's own destruction as well. When Nero ultimately committed suicide in June 68 AD, Sporus was left to face an uncertain future. The emperor's death did not bring freedom to the young man, but rather marked the beginning of yet another phase of his nightmare. As one of the most visible symbols of Nero's reign, Sporus had become a political pawn, a living reminder of the emperor's excesses and madness. The new emperor, Galba, took possession of Sporus, but rather than liberating him, Galba saw the young man as a valuable political asset. Under Galba's rule, Sporus's life did not improve. He remained trapped in the role he had been forced into, neither fully male nor female, neither free nor enslaved, neither honored nor discarded. His identity had been stripped away so completely that he was now little more than a symbol of conquest, an object to be passed from ruler to ruler, each transition stripping him of more dignity. Sporus's fate became increasingly uncertain as Rome's political instability continued. After Galba's assassination in January 69 AD, Sporus was passed on to the next ruler, Otho, and later to Vitellius, who would use him for a truly degrading purpose. It was under Vitellius's rule that Sporus's situation reached its lowest point. Vitellius, seeing Sporus as a tool for public entertainment, planned to force the young man to participate in a grotesque reenactment of the rape of Persephone, a mythological tale of abduction and violation. This final degradation became the breaking point for Sporus. After years of mutilation, forced feminization, and humiliation, Sporus chose death over the ultimate humiliation that Vitellius had planned for him. Sporus's suicide marked the end of a truly horrific chapter in Roman history. His death, however, was not mourned by the public, nor was it considered a significant political event. To the emperor and the aristocracy, Sporus had been reduced to an object, little more than a plaything for the emperor's whims. Yet in his final act of defiance, Sporus reclaimed the one thing that had been denied to him throughout his ordeal: the ability to make his own choice. His decision to take his life was a rejection of the role he had been forced to play, an assertion of his humanity that had been systematically erased over the course of his life. The tragic story of Sporus is not merely a tale of personal suffering, but a haunting reflection of the unchecked cruelty and excess that defined the reign of Emperor Nero, and by extension, the broader imperial system of Rome. His story serves as a chilling reminder of how power can utterly distort reality, how the lives of those caught in the web of imperial authority were not their own, but were manipulated, exploited, and destroyed at the whim of a tyrant. Sporus's fate is a striking example of the depths of dehumanization that can occur when one individual wields absolute power over another, especially in a system that values individuals only as tools to fulfill the desires of the powerful. The experience of Sporus speaks to the systemic vulnerabilities of those living on the fringes of Roman society, the freedmen, slaves, and those without strong familial or political connections. They were often completely at the mercy of the whims of emperors like Nero, whose disregard for human dignity was matched only by his capacity for cruelty. Sporus, once a free citizen, became a pawn in the emperor's bizarre psychological drama. He was deprived of his identity, his agency, and ultimately his life, all because he bore a resemblance to a woman Nero had loved and lost. In understanding Sporus's tragic existence, we must also acknowledge the broader social context of ancient Rome. Roman society, with its rigid hierarchies and its heavy reliance on slavery, viewed individuals as property in many ways, possessions to be bought, sold, or discarded at the will of the emperor. For those at the very bottom of this hierarchy, such as freedmen like Sporus, life was fragile and could be shattered with little regard for their humanity. It's easy to view the story of Sporus through the lens of imperial power alone, but it also serves as a reminder of how the systems of oppression, even in ancient times, shaped the lives of countless others who suffered in silence, their voices and stories often erased by history. What makes Sporus's story particularly poignant is the fact that it was recorded at all. While many other individuals who suffered under the whims of the Roman emperors remain nameless and faceless in the annals of history, Sporus's fate was documented by historians like Suetonius and Dio. This gives his story an exceptional quality. His suffering was significant enough that it became part of the historical record. But the very fact that his story was recorded also highlights how such stories of degradation, though rare, were not entirely outside the realm of possibility in a society built on absolute power. Sporus's fate was extreme, but it serves as an example of the kinds of abuses that were common in a world where the emperor's will was law. Sporus's death, his suicide in the face of impending public humiliation, was not mourned by the masses, and it didn't spark any widespread political outcry. The public, weary of the excesses of Nero and the chaos that had ensued, saw Sporus's life as little more than a tragic side note to the larger drama of the emperor's fall. But to Sporus, his suicide represented the ultimate act of defiance, a refusal to be completely broken by forces far beyond his control. In choosing death, he reclaimed a sliver of agency, something that had been systematically stripped away from him for years. His final act, though tragic, represented a victory of sorts. It was an assertion of his own humanity in the face of an emperor who had sought to erase it entirely. Despite the widespread indifference to his death, Sporus's legacy endures as a powerful symbol of the vulnerability of the human spirit in the face of unrestrained power. His story serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked authority, about the ways in which those at the top of the social hierarchy can exploit and destroy those beneath them. But it also serves as a reminder that even in the darkest moments, even in the most degrading circumstances, the human spirit can endure. Sporus's life, though filled with suffering, demonstrates the resilience of individuals caught in systems of oppression. He may have been stripped of his identity, his agency, and his body, but his final act of defiance showed that there was still a core of selfhood that the emperor could not erase. In the context of Roman imperial history, Sporus represents not just an individual tragedy, but a reflection of the wider moral decay of the imperial system. His fate was a direct consequence of the emperor's disregard for human dignity, but it was also a symptom of a society that allowed such abuses to occur. Nero's treatment of Sporus revealed the toxic power dynamics at play, where those in positions of power saw others as little more than objects to be molded, manipulated, and discarded at will. The story of Sporus forces us to reckon with the horrific consequences of such a system where the emperor's whims were all that mattered, and where the lives of individuals like Sporus were worth nothing more than the fleeting pleasure of the emperor's fantasy. At the same time, however, Sporus' story also serves as a reminder of the power of memory. While his life was reduced to a series of humiliations and psychological torment, his story was recorded, remembered, and passed down through history. In doing so, we honor Sporus not just for the suffering he endured, but for his strength in the face of unimaginable cruelty. His story stands as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, even in the most degrading of circumstances. As we look back on the tale of Sporus, we are forced to confront uncomfortable truths about the nature of power, cruelty, and survival. It is a story that challenges us to examine the ways in which we value and treat others, and it serves as a powerful warning against the dangers of unchecked authority. While Sporus' fate was sealed by the emperor's madness, his story endures, reminding us of the importance of empathy, dignity, and the sanctity of individual identity. In remembering Sporus, we are reminded that behind the grand narratives of empire and conquest, there are countless untold stories of suffering, but also of defiance and survival, a legacy that transcends the darkness of history.